Like a B-movie thriller, there are twists and turns today in the melodrama that is Donald Trump's handling of the U.S. economy. As our colleague Stephanie Ruhle said this morning, quote, Trump appears backed into a corner, end quote. Ahead of talks with China, Trump has now floated lowering the tariff rate to 80%. He posted on Truth Social, quote, 80% tariff on China seems right, up to Scott B. Of course, it's not really just up to Scott B. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. The final decision is up to Donald T. Bessent is set to meet with Chinese officials tomorrow. As the New York Times reports, quote, an 80% tariff would be a big drop from the current 145% that Trump imposed on Chinese imports in recent months. But that high level would still shut off most trade between the countries. While it differs from company to company, some executives have said that tariffs below 50% are generally enough. Tariffs above 50% are generally enough to freeze exports to the U.S. Companies that are not able to find an alternative source of supply for their products outside China are facing the prospect of bankruptcy and layoffs as the summer grinds on. And even 25% tariffs could be crippling. All of that, layoffs, bankruptcy, the prospect of empty shelves. That is what people here in the real world are worried about as Donald Trump posts about lowering tariffs from 145 to 80, quote, up to Scott B. Whatever happens next with tariffs and with our trade war with China, the flippant way with which Trump and his team talk about tariffs, things that affect millions of people, the indifference to the disruption and the economic anxiety their policies and their utterances are causing, that is a movie we've seen before. Think of the firing of more than 250,000 federal workers, or the gutting of U.S. health agencies and research institutions, or the total dismantling of foreign aid without any regard for the consequences for some of the world's most vulnerable people, including children. In a brand new interview, billionaire philanthropist Bill Gates is speaking out about that, telling the FT this, quote, the picture of the world's richest man killing the world's poorest children is not a pretty one. The FT reports this, quote, Gates said Musk had canceled grants to a hospital in Gaza province, Mozambique, that prevents women transmitting HIV to their babies in the mistaken belief that the U.S. was supplying condoms to Hamas in Gaza in the Middle East. Quote, I'd love for him to go in and meet the children that have now been infected with HIV because he cut that money. Bill Gates announced plans to step up where Trump and Musk have pulled away, with plans to spend more than $200 billion on global health in the next 20 years. Gates also expanded on his comments in an interview with Stephen Colbert last night. Watch.
I've been out in the field with the people who work for USAID and seen, the brilliant work they do and how important that is. Unfortunately, there was a weekend where it was decided they were criminals and they were put in the wood chipper. And so we lost a lot of capacity there. Now, we can get it back. Eventually, Congress is the one who will have the final word on this. And even I'm not even sure the administration understands what's going on in the field, because we do have, for the first time in 25 years, we have more children dying. Instead of it going down, it's now going up. And unless we reverse pretty quickly, that'll be over 1 million additional deaths.
And you lay some of this at the feet of Doge and, of course, Elon Musk. And I hope I'm getting this even close here. You said the picture of the world's richest man being involved in the death of the world's poorest is not a pretty one.
That's right.
Well said. Well said.
Widespread damage to the U.S. brand being done by Donald Trump and his administration is where we start today. With me at the table, NPR financial correspondent Maria Aspen is here, along with the host of Politics Nation right here on MSNBC, president of the National Action Network, the Reverend Al Sharpton. Also joining us, the president of Media Matters for America, Angelo Carusone, is here. Let's unpack the tariffs first. Is 80% a good idea, an 80% tariff for China?
Well, is it going to stay at 80%?
Right.
I mean, I think, as you pointed out, the the challenge for businesses and consumers and investors is it's 80% today. It was 145% a few days ago. There's just no certainty, and 80% is a huge amount still. But there is also just the question of, like, is this the final answer? What is the change going to be? As you pointed out, businesses can't make decisions, they can't hire, they can't invest in anything if they don't know what sort of economic conditions they're going to be working with. And meanwhile, this is already hitting consumers. My colleagues at NPR have done some reporting about what sorts of prices consumers are seeing, and they've asked people to send in receipts from showing the impact of tariffs. My colleague Emily Fang talked to one woman who had ordered a wheelchair that had to come from China in early March. By the time it arrived, the price was double. It was $6,000.
Oh my God.
That is real impact from these tariffs.
For whom is 80% not, I mean, for whom does 80% work out?
Well, tariffs are kind of a regressive tax,
right?
Like, tariffs are a tax that are going to most impact the lowest income consumers. So it bears believing that the wealthier consumers who are less price sensitive will be less affected by whatever the tariffs are.
And the same would go on the retail side. The larger retailers could absorb some of those costs, where small business owners are going to have a harder time competing and pricing their inventory.
Yes, but we are also seeing some of the biggest businesses in the country pulling or cutting their financial guidance, including, for instance, Barbie maker Mattel, saying we are going to pass on, or we will have to pass on, these costs to consumers.
And about that, Donald Trump says no one needs 30 dolls. You can do with 2. No one buys 30 dolls. This feels like if our politics hadn't been totally turned upside down, this is sort of the political tone deafness that, you know, George H.W. Bush was damaged irreparably for not, you know, recognizing sort of the scanner at the grocery store. I mean, there are, in the course of the history of presidential politics and the coverage of presidential politics, this is along the lines of tone deafness in a league of its own.
Not only is it tone deaf, the implicit statement that you get from him saying no one needs 30 dolls is he's again implying like working class people just splurge and spend money irresponsibly. Nobody has 30 dolls. So where do you even get that picture in your head? And then to play games with 1 minute 145 tariff, down to 80, and I might go back to 90. You're playing with small businesses. You're playing with people that need to shop and buy things. And this is not some back and forward that you may do on a building negotiation when you were a developer. This is real life people suffering. We're seeing people now having to go up on flowers just for Mother's Day Sunday. But he doesn't live in that world. He lives in this world that very few people other than his billionaire friends live in. And the pain and suffering that it causes people on the ground is something oblivious to him and seemingly unconcerned about. To say we're going to leave it up to his negotiator, and like we're playing some kind of pass off a football game. We're talking about people's survival, people's lives, people's jobs, and President Trump clearly doesn't get that. Many of them were supporters of him. We're talking about farmers. We're talking about people in red states. They're going to feel this the most. He is oblivious to that and unconcerned.
Angela, you introduced this great term about narrative dominance. I don't know how this is going to play out, but I do see this as a sliding doors moment for Donald Trump, where the brand that he rode to the White House of a successful businessman, he's taken this sort of fork in the road to wrapping both arms around being America's first oligarch, selling his crypto stuff to the very same people he wants to do without 30 dolls and sort of make do with 2, sneering at the idea of strollers costing more, telling my colleague Kristen Welker, quote, why would you ask about that? Where do you see this economic cliff that he's about to take the country off of, maybe intersecting with what has so far been a pretty firm grip on the narrative?
Yeah, I mean, you sort of mentioned this before in the last couple of weeks in your show, and you're right that at some point the reality will hit his supporters and his audiences. We're not there yet. If you just look at what's happening in the right-wing media, in the places adjacent to the right-wing media, they are still framing this as a positive thing, as a part of his masterful negotiations, that this is positional bargaining. And to the extent that these things come out, so for example, with this discussion about 80%, when they do talk about it, what they actually do is they blame big corporations. They say Walmart leaked this in order to weaken Donald Trump's position at the negotiating table because they're in cahoots with China. These other big companies leaked this. So the same playbook that was used about the deep state his first term is now being used to sort of prop up Trump's sort of actions. But instead of it being the deep state, now it's all of these other companies. So Trump is just this embattled leader that's fighting all these bad forces. So when they do confront it in these moments, they blame somebody else. They blame new targets. And I think that, to me, is the real question. We are at this moment. One of the benefits that they have is an ecosystem that can spin up these narratives and reinforce them amongst their supporters and then the wider populace. Authoritarianism is theater, and what Trump is doing is a lot of theater, right? The UK deal, all this stuff, this positional bargaining, it's all theater. But the question is, are people going to be able to connect the harms that they're experiencing? And people are no doubt going to connect harms to Trump's policies. And right now, if the status quo remains, people are basically his supporters in the ecosystem that he's built power on, that he organized power on, that has propped him up. It is still very firmly saying there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Sean Hannity is hailing this as Trump's manifest destiny. So I just think, and I don't want to be the naysayer, because I think there's a real pathway here. There are real opportunities. But what you point to is this reality that is simply an opportunity. That cliff is an opportunity for Democrats and others to connect the harms to Trump's policies. But right now, someone has to be building and preparing that connective tissue. And otherwise, he will continue to maintain the dominant narrative.